Hello, and welcome to the Heart of Entrepreneurship podcast, where we explore building a startup from a place of love and inspiration and presence. I'm here with a very special guest, the extraordinary entrepreneur, Gagan Biyani. Gagan has founded Udemy as well as Sprig, which supplied lunch for my last startup every day for years. So I'm very grateful. Um, and more recently, Maven, one of the leading cohort-based learning platforms, and many, many other things that we'll get into. But truly, I think an extraordinary entrepreneur. And one thing I just want to say to kick off, having had the chance to spend some real quality time with you last year is, or was that earlier this year? Gosh, earlier this year. Uh, well, first of all, I love you. And I really, really appreciate you for your mix of brilliance and heart. Like people talk a lot about this, like, oh, head and heart. And I just see like a depth in you in both dimensions. So just want to let you know how much I appreciate you for that.
Thank you, Dave. Well, I had a really special time with you, as you know, and I love that you've dedicated your life to giving your gift to others, and I really felt that presence. So happy to be here.
Yeah. And just people are wondering context. We did a retreat in Sun Valley for about 4 days, about a dozen founders that Gagan participated in last January. Um, so let's just start, maybe just share a little bit about your journey. Um, like what do you want people listening to know about your journey, maybe not just what we could read on LinkedIn, but some of the more interesting aspects that you think have really shaped how you've evolved as a founder over the years.
Yeah. I grew up in a middle class family in the Bay Area, but I knew nothing about startups or business and didn't know you could become an entrepreneur as classic Indian kid, doctor, lawyer, or engineer. Is what the expectation was. And I think that um, over the course of my teenage years, my parents they split up and we had a bunch of financial difficulty. And it really fueled me to think about money and business as a motivation for, to drive me forward. And so I think that I very much started to become entrepreneurial at that same time. I started my first business when I was like, 12 or 13 years old. And I
What
think
what was that?
it was a speech and debate camp. Um, so kind of a friend approached me and said, "Hey, we should run a camp together." We ran it together, and then it became this big thing. It became, 150 plus students in a summer. By our fourth or fifth summer, we were doing like, I don't know, 50 grand or something in revenue. I really don't remember.
Wow, at 13 years old.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. Yeah, well,
Were you
by
as
that
nerdy as that sounds, or did you just figure out how to tap into that kind of need in the community?
I missed the question.
I said, were you as nerdy as that sounds,
Oh
or did you
yeah.
just figure out? Yeah, okay.
I was nerdy, but I
I
lived
was
in a
pretty
place.
nerdy, but speech and debate feels like a whole nother level. I know Jesse did it too, so there's some correlation maybe there of success.
It's by far the number one activity you can put your kid into if you want them to be, happy and successful because it teaches public speaking, it teaches thinking, which is probably the number one thing it teaches is just logical thinking. It also teaches philosophy as well as it's competitive. So it has honestly like a ton of benefits. Um, and I really am grateful I had that. I wasn't as good a debater as I was a teacher and a business person. So I basically started the education business and realized that amongst my peers, we were the number one debate team in the country my sophomore year and my senior year. And completely bootstrapped. We were like the only team without a coach, without a formal coach.
Hmm.
School didn't pay for anything. Um, and we basically made used the camp to fund the program. And yeah, I was I think worth noting, like I was both a great business person and also like a terrible manager. Had fights with my team members, which candidly like still happens to this day, but was less mature about it back then. And so I always had this sort of duality for me of like, okay, like people like working with me. Like most people really enjoy working with me, but every once in a while there's like a personality conflict and I just like can't deal. And so it's something we might talk about, but basically from there, I went to college and I just like slowly over high school and college became very disaffected by the education system and really wanted to change it and felt like universities act like they have this elitism. This is in 2005, you know, so remember back then people weren't, it wasn't mainstream to say universities suck. Like most people assumed that getting an MBA was the number one most valuable thing you could do if you were going into business. And um, I did not feel that way. In fact, I had extreme disdain for the education system. I thought it was really bad. I thought that Berkeley was way underpowered relative to its potential, which is where I went to school. And um, and so I came out thinking, man, I really want to change this, but I had no idea how. And I eventually found my way into entrepreneurship. It took me a year and a half to figure out that it was an opportunity. This is back when no one knew that you could start an app and make $1 million. No one knew you could start a startup. Like the vast majority of people thought that that was, didn't believe that was a career trajectory. Um, Now we're in like 2009, 2010, and eventually I discovered TechCrunch and started reading and sort of looking into this and realized, whoa, there's a micro, cosm of people who are microcosm is not the perfect word, but there's a small group of people for which for which they are making a career out of building, tech companies. And I didn't know that was possible.
Mm.
Once I figured that out, I was all in. And so I ended up meeting the co-founders of Udemy, building that company. And then I had kind of a chaotic exit where my co-founder and I split up and he basically fired me. Uh, Went through a year of sort of figuring out what was next and then came up with the idea for Sprig. Started Sprig, grew it really fast. Eventually, like it totally collapsed um, and shut it down. Then took 3 years off, and then started Maven, which also went through like a 1 to 2 year period of like a total rise and collapse. And then I had to we had to restart the company almost with some of the same principles, but just slight edits to the business model and to the customer segment we were targeting. And now it feels like Maven's like on a healthy trajectory, and we're quite proud of what we deliver. So that's sort of my entrepreneurial journey.
And if I can, you had a co-founder at Maven.
I've had two. One has left, and one I'm still working with, and we have a 5 year relationship now.
So you've had a number of experiences of having being a co-founder and then having you or a co-founder leave. So that might be something to explore. And
Yeah, I mean, basically every company that I've been involved with, and almost every company I've ever heard of, has a co-founder departure. So it's actually like I cannot think of a company that I know of that doesn't have a co-founder who was really early, who eventually left. And then that person usually gets erased from history, so no one knows about them, but they exist. And then usually if you have 2 to 3 co-founders, you know, I've almost never seen a company where all three last to the end, if you will, like to the exit or to the IPO or whatever. That also isn't very common.
it's interesting. It doesn't get talked about a lot. Maybe to your point of like the second or third co-founder gets erased in history, but it's I notice it's as you're saying it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can think of a lot of examples like that, and it's not a commonly, discussed thing in Silicon Valley and startup communities, and which, I think if you are a co-founder and you're parting ways with another co-founder or thinking about it, it really is not normalized. So it can feel like, oh my God, what's wrong with me that like I can't make this work with my co-founders. So I'm just appreciating normalizing it a bit. That like it's almost like, almost maybe more intense than a marriage in some ways. Plus there has to be all these other layers of alignment beyond just like the romantic and sort of life alignment of like how you want to do business and your goals and all that. So it makes sense to me that the odds of you choosing somebody for whom that alignment is totally on and stays on as things evolve are low. And given that 50% of marriages end in divorce, it's not shocking that co-founder marriages often do too. But it's interesting how I don't hear that talked about a lot. Yeah, there's so many
Yeah,
threads I want to pull on. Go ahead.
just to pull on that for a second, I mean, I would say normalizing any sort of churn within a company is really important. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very common as a first-time founder, especially if you're the type who's listening to a podcast called Heart of Entrepreneurship, for you to feel like bad every time someone
Mm,
leaves. And everyone does. Like, I feel bad every single time anyone leaves. Like, that's just whether they leave voluntarily or whether I have to let them go, it sucks. But I would also say like it's sort of the norm, right? Like of early teams, first 10 employees, like 5 years in, the chances that you have more than 20% of that team is pretty low. And at Maven, we have roughly 50% of that team about 5 years in. And, you know, we're lucky and we put, I've grown a lot. And so I kind of am better at both identifying people and also retaining
mm,
them if they're the right fit. But I'd still say that means 50% of our early team is gone. And actually, if you like look at old offsite pictures of Maven, half the people are gone. Like, and it's normal. So that's probably a broader way of saying not just co-founders. It's anyone you work with. Like, executive coaches, same thing. Like, the number of executive coach relationships that last forever, very, very few, probably less than 20, 10%. I don't know, something like that.
yeah. And then you end up doing a podcast together.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so I love this point too, because I do, work with a lot of founders who, especially the first person they let go, but even the 10th or 100th, there's this incredible amount of fear and tension and guilt, really. This is something I work with founders a lot on, this notion of like the hero move, the like, oh, I feel bad letting them go. I want to sort of save them from that pain. And I think it's really important, one, to recognize if somebody is not a good fit for your team, it's actually a lose-lose. Like you're really not doing them a favor by keeping. I see you nodding, so it's I agree. You're not doing them a favor by keeping them. One, like in all these subtle ways, they will get the message that you don't think they're awesome, and that has a huge effect on their experience and psychology. And two, if they're not in a role where they're thriving, right? If they were thriving, you wouldn't be wanting to let them go. So they're clearly not in a role where they're thriving, and letting them go find a role where they can thrive is I don't want to go so far like it's a gift. Like let's not be empathic and recognize that it is a really scary, sometimes sad, frustrating experience to be let go. So, as a human, we can empathize with that. And it can be a real big blow to our ego. It's like, oh, I thought I was good. I've never had a setback in my life, and now I'm fired. It can be really scary. And, I know so many people for whom it was the best thing that ever happened to them. And I think it's easy to just see it as bad. And you even said like you always feel bad, and if I was coaching you, I would invite you to discern, because we use that language a lot, like, oh, I feel bad. Like what you really mean is I feel sad, most
And
likely,
guilty.
and
Um,
and maybe
it's
guilty.
sad and
Yeah.
guilty and embarrassed. Probably three
Mm,
words that I would bring in. I mean, for me, when I uh, end up letting someone go, in part, it's, you know, the end of what was originally a very exciting relationship, because hiring someone is a very um, positive feeling, and I'm usually really optimistic when someone comes onto the team, and so I'm usually a little bit embarrassed about the fact that I was wrong.
mm,
Usually by the time someone's being let go, I also have already done things that are embarrassing, because generally speaking, when someone's let go, I usually let them go a little late, and I'm usually already telling them that they aren't doing a good job in ways that are not the nicest way to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and for what it's worth, I think like my way tends to result in like chaos fast, but luckily that also means that I let go of people fast. There's also like the alternate personality type that has no chaos, but lingers for, months and years. And what you don't realize in that situation is, yeah, there was no conflict, but also subconsciously there was a lot of damage being done. Um,
Yes.
to if there was a lack of confidence in the relationship and you were sort of not giving that person their full opportunity to do what they wanted. So either way, I think that when a departure occurs, yeah, sadness, embarrassment, frustration, guilt.
Yeah. And so who wants to feel all those things, right? So, that's, I think, the trap that a lot of founders fall into is like, I don't want to feel that. So then they avoid it. And then, like you said, it's probably the most cliche and also true line that I've heard from founders, which is like, I always wish I had done it sooner. I've literally never met a founder who's like, oh God, I wish I'd waited a little longer to let go of that person. Literally never. Um, and so every time, at least I've seen it, once they let the person go, first of all, the stories they made up about the bad things that might happen, especially with senior people. Oh my God, if I let go of my head of sales or head of engineering, like that could be catastrophic and the company will burn down and we won't be able to raise money, all these things. And then in many cases, I see the literal opposite happen. Be curious if you have examples like that, where like team members step up in surprising ways. The like, the culture sort of uplifts because there was a way that that person, because they weren't a fit, were kind of, anchoring down the culture or the team. So I think your earlier point, like churn is normal and it's a part of the experience, is important, both if you're a team member, that you don't make it mean too much about you, right? Like startups are an evolving creature and you might have been a perfect fit for year one or year 0 to 2, and it's no longer a fit. It doesn't mean you're a bad human, that you're not valuable and valid. It just may no longer be a fit. And then, for founders and leaders, um, there's this kind of meme, that I learned in Joe Hudson's masterclass around, called enjoy over manage. And he makes this point that like if you think about your best team members, best employees, they don't actually require that much management. Like it's a pretty is that, I don't know if that's your experience, be curious to hear.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that entirely. In fact, my best members manage me.
Uh-huh, right. So if you're spending a lot of time managing people, um, it probably means you don't have enough churn, right? You're like, I just see this pattern a lot of like, oh, but aren't I supposed to coach them into their greatness? And aren't I supposed to like, manage them well? And if I was just managing them better, what Joe says he does when he hires, he asks someone like, what's your dream job? And then if their dream job is the job, then he hires them and, tries to really help them, discern what actually is their dream job and is that true. And the point there is just, I think most founders tolerate a lack of alignment that's like way, larger than optimal for everybody. And I had a professor, in business school where I wasted, hundreds of thousands of dollars, according to Gagan, um, who said that like the best in the world are like baseball players; they get it right maybe 2 out of 3 times, in terms of batting average. And
One out of three.
so, what's that?
But batting average 1 out of 3.
What is it? 1 out of 3?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, you can see I don't know anything about baseball either.
300 is an outstanding batting average.
Okay, perfect. Even
Like
makes the
you
point
would
even
go to
more
the Hall of
strongly.
Fame if you have an over 300 batting average for a long period of time. Like it's really outstanding. And I don't know that much about baseball, but I know enough to know that that's true. And so like 1 in 3. So baseball is actually a very interesting analogy for that reason.
Yeah. So if you start with that premise that getting it right 1 out of 3 times is winning, there's a lot less self-judgment. And it's interesting, you use the word embarrassment and guilt. Um, I was funny. Like I just made a mistake, right? So I said 2 out of 3. It was actually 1 out of 3. I can feel a little bit of like a twinge of embarrassment, and um, I just yeah, like just as a coaching moment for you, I would there's a general theme I would say of welcome the feeling, question the story. So if I was coaching on that and supporting you to have a more, um, you know, preferred experience around letting people go, I would welcome the feeling of embarrassment because feelings just are, but I would question the story that like you did something wrong. And actually that, right, there's like an embarrassment, like I screwed up in some way and that's bad. And so I would, given that what we just said, you got if you still have 50% of your people, maybe you're Hall of Fame territory. So I would just invite you to question the story that like, oh, that's bad, like that you could feel the embarrassment if that's what you feel, but that like I ought to be embarrassed because I made a mistake in hiring. And then guilt requires a story that you did something wrong, more in the sense of like ethically. And again, welcome the guilt as a feeling. And I would invite you to question that story that you're doing something wrong in letting someone go, because you might be letting them go find their next amazing, career or boss. Does
Yeah,
that resonate?
I think a lot of that resonates with me. I think that, the resistance I have internally to hearing that is, well, on some level, recognizing that I might have made a mistake at the beginning where I hired the wrong person, or that I might have made a mistake along the way in how I managed them or what expectations I set for them. Um, Also, my story is that it helps me do better next time. It sort of provides a drive. And one of the big challenges, like just to take this very macro that I've had over my career, is like I told you the story about how I started. Like I started to put food on the table for my family, particularly long-term economic stability, and I've now delivered that. Like my family doesn't have economic challenges anymore. And um,
Congratulations.
thank you. It's a huge relief. It's
Yeah, it's a big
insanely
deal.
like every day, not every day, but like every month or two, you recognize this and you think to yourself like pinch me, you know.
Mhm.
But
You feel grateful?
very grateful.
Yeah,
Like
beautiful.
yeah, very like and even my brother has done that for himself as well. So between the two of us, it's like really fun to watch us both like, and now our partners are also like very very successful. So it's like as we've grown the family, like we're very and none of the four, my brother, his partner, me, my partner, like none of us came from that kind of stability. So it is a big deal. Um, and so going to this next, uh, bringing this back, it's like there is this feeling of, well, when I started my career, I was entirely motivated by like fixing wrongs and sort of like pain driven motivation, right? Like
Mhm.
on some level. And it's been actually quite challenging. Like quite challenging. Like I would say it's been like it hasn't been nearly as emotionally challenging as being pain driven, so it was way better. But
Mhm.
from an intellectual or even a growth perspective, it's been as challenging. Like I haven't figured out how to get out of pain driven motivation. And this example is a great example of, when I let someone go, I almost want to feel bad about it because it forces me to reflect and improve. That's my story. So I'm curious what you would say to that story, how you would navigate that.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Let's unpack it. I know, just first, let me just scratch this curiosity itch because it just keeps coming into my mind, if that's okay. So you're a kid, you're experiencing financial instability, your parents are struggling, and you say to yourself, I want financial stability. And somehow you go from that to I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. Not the most obvious, right? I could see like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be an accountant. I notice I'm just really curious to like, how does that happen in your mind that entrepreneur is the thing? Because you said you weren't in and of Silicon Valley growing up. Like, how did that occur to you as the thing that was the path for you to economic stability?
I don't think that when I started it, there's a difference between the conscious and the subconscious, right? So
Yeah.
retrospectively, subconsciously, I was very driven to deliver financial stability for my family, and it, drove me significantly. However, on a conscious level, I wasn't thinking about that. And my
Got
mom did a very good job of not, even though there was a lot of pressure and I kind of knew it, like I was paying rent to my mother, even when I was a fresh grad right out of college,
it. Mm.
like, you know, even though there was the pressure, my mom, I think, did a very good job. And maybe I also somehow knew to take the gift of, okay, but like don't put that pressure on you like on a daily basis. So I wasn't as conscious of it. So it was like, so why did I eventually start a company? You know, well, I thought it was more about control over over financial stability than it
Mm.
was and betting on myself than it was necessarily like the guarantee of financial stability. And I think these are
Mm.
very, very different. So somehow, I don't have a good explanation today on it. Maybe we could, if we spent the whole podcast, I'm sure we get to it. But like somehow my way of thinking about, financial success was more actually on the control aspect of it
Mm.
than it was on the stability aspect of it. So, what entrepreneurship gave me was this feeling that if I did a good job, I would succeed and I would be rewarded. And to allow myself to free myself of the shackles of, to bring it back to the education system, of other people's judgment of how good I was, that was, I think, how I wanted to deliver financial stability for myself. I wanted to do it without feeling reliant upon others. And one of the challenges with doctor, lawyer, engineer is, as long as you're not, I mean, even in entrepreneurship, you're relying on other people. You eventually realize that. But
Yeah.
like, it is one of the most independent forms of success. You can do it more your own way than anything else. And I was constantly frustrated that I thought I was way better than what my like society was giving me credit for
Mm.
throughout. So my frustrations with high school and college were basically that I was being like pressed down, that I thought I was better than the rankings I was getting, than the colleges I was getting and I was getting from my teachers. And so that is actually that combined with financial concerns led to this, not solely. I would say I was not actually very top of mind thinking about money.
Got it. Sounds like you wanted something that was more pure meritocracy, like my actual
Yes.
talent leads to the result. And
Yes.
yeah, if you're an engineer or one of these, you can be fired. Versus an entrepreneur, in theory, you control your own destiny. And then you're at Udemy and you get fired.
Yeah.
How was that for you, given everything you just said? And how was that experience? What'd you learn from
Yeah.
it?
I mean, I think, I was like 23. So I was, that's crazy. Like I started the company at 21. I was maybe 23, 24 when I got fired. So I was still just insanely young and immature. And so it was actually at that time, it was a reinforcing mechanism of, okay, well, I need to be in full control, not in part control.
Mm.
And my reaction was to double down on control. And you know, I will say that I think it's actually beautiful to have that feeling, as well as it does cause challenges because, as we all know, the story of Sprig ends up being trying to have full control and then eventually like just completely losing anyways. Um, but there are
And
some.
those two things were directly related. Like,
I
ha-
think so. Yeah. I mean, well, no, yes and no. I mean, they're directly related. So I took full control. Like I own 55% of, or 45%, but I was basically like, we had four co-founders and I took the majority of the equity at Sprig. And, um,
which, for
I,
those who don't know, was a hot meal delivery service. Is that,
yeah, it was basically like one of the first ghost kitchens.
yeah.
We had a central kitchen in San Francisco, and we delivered hot food that was healthy and the menu changed daily
Yeah,
in 15 to 20 minutes for $15 to $20.
yeah, it was awesome.
Well,
As a consumer of it, as I mentioned, I fed myself and my team in my startup, and I loved the service. So okay, and then yeah, so you had 55%, you wanted control.
so I made decisions, consistent decisions to sort of like I was working at Lyft. I liked Lyft, but I didn't try to double down on appeasing the Lyft founders and sort of building my career around them, even though that company was I knew, it was probably worth less than 100 million when I was there, and I knew it was going to become big. I thought it would have been bigger than what it is, but of course, as we all know, the story was a little more rocky towards
Mhm.
the latter period of that company's history. But the point being that I, chose to go out on my own. I remember my first investor, my Series A investor, not the seed investor of Sprig. So my second investor, he, once made this comment to me. He was doing diligence on me. He did a ton of diligence. Talked to my co-founder at Udemy, and you know, his eventual conclusion that I asked him like, why did you get comfortable with investing in me after hearing about this story of Udemy? He's like, what I learned was you had to be CEO. And the beauty in that is, I think he was right.
Mm.
I think that for me to be truly successful and sort of achieve my best version of myself, it was always going to be sort of charting my own path and being in control of that destiny. And I think that I feel it is unlikely at this point in my life that that will ever change. Like I
Mm.
feel
Is that what
confident.
happened at Udemy? Was there clash with like a sense of
Yeah,
power struggle, wanting to have decision authority and
I,
control?
I mean, I think that that is. There are multiple stories of how you could describe the Udemy situation, but one of the big ones was that Aaron, who I'm now very close with and talk to quite regularly, he's a mentor of mine, but Aaron was CEO. He was very much deserving to be CEO. There was no question. But as the company started to evolve and grow, I started to wonder if it made more sense eventually for me to be CEO because there were certain parts of the job, the CEO job, that I was clearly better at. I think even to this day, he would say I'm better at even now, even though he's learned all these skills now. But like
Like what? Just a
managing investors, operating a P&L, like more from a financial standpoint, not from a product standpoint,
Mhm.
not from a vision standpoint. Um, Managing a marketing team and marketplaces are just very driven by supply and demand more so than product. So the company was basically like needed to be very good at marketing
Yeah.
and sales. And so I, go to market, I would say I was better at. He was a much more stable leader. He was a better manager. He it still is to this day. He's a more he's more of a visionary. He takes way bigger risks. I'm a little bit more balanced and measured. He's a little bit more shoot by the hip, crazy, but
Mhm.
also like in a good way, right? Like does things that no one would expect, and that can be really magnificent. And so we have very polar styles that would have actually blossomed well. I think the other challenge we had is, as founders, we just simply couldn't raise money from the best people, and as a result, we didn't have good mentors or coaches or
Mhm.
anyone to help
Mhm.
us navigate this relationship. And I will always wonder, if we had different
Mhm.
VCs or if we had different, um, you know, uh, if we had coaches or whatever, would we have been able to work it out? Because we did eventually build a very positive relationship. Many years later, we
Mhm.
reconnected. Um, and so, yeah, I think so. That's all to say that the lesson for me of Udemy and Sprig was a real focus on control in a world where, yes, you do have more micro control, but your macro control is still very low. I think,
Mhm.
startups, I think in entrepreneurship, you have a lot of macro and micro control because if your goal is just to make half a million to a few $1 million a year, and Jesse's going to hate me for this, but like, sorry, it's just easy. Like like for me at least, like that's easy. Like, and the level of
It's relatively easy, we could say, to
relative, of course.
yeah, tens or hundreds of millions in $1 billion business. Yes.
Yeah, it's completely different. And what that means when I say easy, what I mean is it is solely in your control. You can, in any
Mm.
business, no matter what business or market you enter, you can build a multi-million dollar business in that. If you want to sell Q-tips, you can do it. If you want to build, you can build a multi-million dollar business in freaking Q-tips. You can build a multi-million dollar business in, car sales, in restaurants, like whatever it is doable, and you cannot blame the macro environment at all. Um, Once you get into hundreds of millions or billions of revenue, and your goal is to go from zero to that over, 5, 10, 20 years, the macro risks are really high.
Mm.
And you have to predict the future and ride waves that are impossible for anyone to know. Because if they were possible, then VCs would be more accurate, right? But even the best VCs bat like a baseball player at 300, and that's unheard of.
But
Like that's
but the good
legend.
news is their Grand Slam home runs are worth 1,000, 1,000 runs versus just four. Um, Go on. You want to finish
Yeah,
thought?
so typical VC, if they bat 10%, they're killing it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's better than zero. As long as you're better than zero as a VC, you're pretty much doing well. Um, and so uh, in startup land, you do have a lot of macro risk, and there's just no way around it. And there's not a startup out there that has the potential to get to hundreds of millions or billions of dollars that doesn't have macro risk, especially on a 10-year horizon. And as a result, you kind of have to accept that when you start a startup.
Yeah, there's this really simple exercise I learned from the Conscious Leadership Group that I love called sorting the files. And the idea is you have two manila file folders, for those who remember what those are. And one file folder is entitled Things I Can Control, and the other file folder is entitled Things I Can't Control. And the real issue with control is confusing which things go in which folder, right? Because I see so many, especially founders, try to control things that they can't control, even with firing people, like how the person's going to feel, right? I had a conversation this morning with a client who's like trying to figure out, what to say to get the person to feel the thing they want them to feel, right? That's an example of trying to control something that's not in your control versus just speaking your truth and they'll have the experience they have. And similarly, or letting someone go and letting them have their experience. They might be sad, they might be angry, they might be scared, and not trying to control that. Or like you're saying, like these macro, environment, tariffs, governmental, that there's, and we could maybe just call it luck at some level, right? It's just the humility to recognize there's a certain, well, we could just say there's things that are within your control and things that are not. By the way, the other things that are not in your control are like um, your thoughts, what people think of you, what people say about you, what other people feel, um, even to some degree your own feelings. So a lot of energy is wasted trying to control things that you actually can't control. And I'm saying that to the audience, and I'm saying that to you, Gagan. That like I'd be curious, for you to kind of do that audit of like, okay, where am I trying to control things that I actually can't control? And that's where you tend to get into trouble. Um, I'm still a little curious how the like you see the needing to control leading to Sprig not working. And I want to leave time to go into this the heart of the matter here around motivating yourself from pain and what I think I might have heard you say that I might perceive as like the chip on your shoulder of trying to prove something and how that served you and how kind of this question of what if you didn't have that and would you still be motivated and how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I don't have it today, so we're
Ah,
not. I don't.
nothing to prove.
Uh, I mean, to say that there's nothing to prove would be would be
But
an exaggeration, but we are very very much in a polar opposite level of needing to prove things. Uh,
amazing. How'd you do that?
Well, I proved it. I don't know.
That's
Uh,
one way. Okay.
no, I don't think it's just that. I don't think it's just that. I think that with Sprig, I was confronted with the reality that there is quite a bit of luck. Well, I have to make sense of it one of two ways. Like I could make sense of it like I made the wrong decision and chose the wrong market. I think that's true, and I think that's right. But I can also confront it like, what market you end up picking is kind of random. And, having now met a lot of the most successful founders out there, and having interacted with, people who are made billions of dollars as founders who have started iconic companies, and then I myself having done, a significant order of magnitude less than that, but still having real success. And then there are people who have done an order of magnitude less than me.
Yeah.
Um, and comparing and contrasting, I have very significant trouble believing that there's a difference in intelligence and capability of, say, the Google founders. I'll go that extreme, you know, and the founders of Lyft. I've not met the Google founders too much. I don't know them, but I'm just giving an example everyone can relate to, and also not trying to subtweet someone that I know. So it's better to just name a random person. It's like,
Sure.
um, the talent level, um, at a certain point is not the defining factor, and your decision making is not the defining factor of your success, especially in such a high variance business. Like, is Jeff Bezos the smartest? Well, let's not say what is he today. Today, he might be the smartest business person on the planet. That's very possible. But in, I think he started Amazon probably in his early 30s, if I remember correctly. Like, it was after a career on Wall Street, so late 20s, early 30s, whatever. When he started Amazon, was he, if you just like compared his, like, if you had a, you
Right.
know,
Was he a billion times smarter than,
yeah,
your
not even a billion. Like, was he even 2 times smarter than like someone else who started another company that didn't work out? Let's say Daisy Systems or Sun Microsystems or whatever, that didn't get to the same thing. So
Mhm.
even 2 times smarter, like he wasn't. Like, I wouldn't even be surprised if the variance there is so low that it's imperceptible
Mhm.
to a like it's imperceptible. Like, Jeff Bezos could have been 20% dumber and still had the same outcome, and you wouldn't be able to predict it. There'd be no correlative, in my science, the science is in my brain, the math is all in my brain, but I'm not able to articulate it with scientific terminology. But like, there is not as much of a correlation there. And what does that mean? What does that mean for me? Well, for me, what that means is that, like, my life has taken me on this path. I am an N of one. As I go through life, I make decisions that fit me really well.
Yeah.
And I cannot assume that that is going to lead to X, Y, or Z levels of success, like, compared to others. But I can assume, and I do assume, that because I know that I'm sufficiently talented and I'm doing a good job and I'm doing my best, like, I will get I will get something that will be sufficient for me. And that, I think, is kind of the lesson that you have to come to at some point. And am I 100% there? No, I still compare myself to all my friends who, I have friends who run a billion-dollar company and are worth, 10x more than me. And they got to do it, from 0 to 1, like 0 to 100. I went zero to five. I didn't get 5 to 100. And
Yeah.
that is a chip on my shoulder a little bit. But I think I also am just like, yeah, that's kind of what happened. And like, I still, mostly for the vast majority of my time, think of myself as just like a really happy person today, and not
Mhm.
very driven by this comparison or even self comparison of how good am I.
Mhm. Yeah. And uh, one thing you're pointing to is we're just human, and the human mind tends to compare. And notice it doesn't tend to compare to all the billions of people who are, quote, worse off than us. It just compares to the few people we can find that are, quote, better off. Also, really appreciating your comment on timing. My last startup was a meeting software company that we sold to Cisco in 2016 and almost sold to Zoom actually in 2016. And had we started it 3 years later, like I think it would have been a really, really different outcome. And certainly didn't know COVID was coming. So timing really does matter. And I think if there's probably several takeaways, but if there's a core takeaway that I would want entrepreneurs listening, it's that um, you make it mean so much more about you than it actually means. Like you make it so personal, and it's not that personal. To your point, like whether you end up Larry, Sergey, Jeff Bezos, Elon, Sam, like or something else is not truly a reflection of how valuable you are as a human. I mean, not at all. I believe all humans are equally valuable. And so that mistake of equating your value to the value of your company I think, is a major trap. And I think part of the idea of heart of entrepreneurship is to shift away from that, because that trap, I think, is one of the things that creates attachment, creates fear, creates, and maybe we can use this as a segue to this conversation around, creates this feeling of pain, this heaviness, this stress. And I do think most founders are driven by what you're calling pain, or some sense of lack or fear. For a long time, for you, I think, felt like scarcity and lack, and a need to, both prove something, but also um, achieve some sense of safety that you didn't feel. And it's interesting to me that you have achieve that level of economic, you have enough money now that you don't feel financially insecure. And it sounds like I'm curious, like how safe you actually feel, because there's um, I guess, a story I have that money doesn't actually give you that safety that many people discover once they get money, that feeling of safety. So I'm curious if that's your experience. But when I asked you what had you no longer have a chip on your shoulder, part of your answer was that you proved it. So yeah, curious a little bit about your experience, because I think
Yeah.
part of it was the failure, and facing that failure of Sprig. My guess was also a formative experience in your growth. So yeah, maybe just talk a little bit about how you feel like you've grown as a human being through these different, startup journeys. And then let's get specifically into how you're still motivating yourself from pain, and how you might shift that.
Yeah, I mean, so let's disambiguate like proving it from burden of proof for a moment. So, you know, if you looked at my burden of proof that I had for myself in my 20s, probably mid to late 20s, like in my early 20s, honestly, like if you had told me that I would accomplish what we did with Udemy, even with leaving Udemy and everything else, I just would have been like, oh my God, you like, so actually, if you look at my 21-year-old self or anyone prior to like really 25, 26, like, you know, I would say my burden of proof was so low. Like it was just like, yeah, I have a successful business. Like, great, I
Mm.
made $1 million. Like, that would have been great for most of that time. And maybe your eyes get slightly bigger as you get closer to it. So, but then I think around Sprig time, which I was 24 when I started Sprig, but 25, 26 is when it really came into focus. I'd say, my burden of proof astronomically increased, right?
Mm.
I got my
You
burden of
you
proof.
raised the bar.
Yeah, raised the bar a lot. Like I was like, I'm gonna have started $2 billion companies by the time I'm 30. I'm gonna be one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time. Like blah blah blah. Like, and I'm gonna do it by 30. And
What was
in
important to you
reality,
about that? Do you know?
um, just proving that I was good. I think actually like the underlying uh sort of story going on here is like feeling like I had to prove to somebody that I was good.
Mm.
And feeling like in most of my childhood, and I was getting external signals mostly from adults and the system that I was like good but not great, basically. And like
Mm.
I guess more accurate than good is like I wanted to prove that I was great. And I was very frustrated by the fact that I was being told I was good but not great.
Mm.
And that and so I wanted to prove that, I think. And then with Sprig and the departure from Sprig, you know, where I really think that my burden proof completely changed was not during or even immediately after, but I took 3 years off after,
Mm.
which
Wait,
is
before you go there, do you remember how you felt when it was clear like Sprig is failing? What was that
total
like?
relief.
Interesting.
Well, when it is failing, when you first start to get it, like complete dread for about a year and a half,
Mm.
like debilitating levels of dread, like
Mm.
sometimes could not go to the office, like I mean, we were laying off people, like we had over 1,500, we had 1,300 employees at our peak payroll, 2 week payroll period. So, and we let go of all of them over the course of a year and a half. So
Wow.
like it was just constant firefighting and dread and
Shame?
self-disappointment and shame
Mm.
and fear and all sorts of things. Once we decided to shut it down, complete immediate relief, and I never felt that dread again. Like I don't think it
Mm.
ever came back really. It just immediately was relief. And and so it was after that relief, I then was like, holy shit, like I'm a millionaire and I'm completely free. Like that control conversation,
Mm.
right? Is like actually what you realize when you start a company, especially when you raise money from investors, you have employees, you have
Right.
co
You have more bosses than anybody
you
in a
have
certain
more
sense.
bosses than anybody. Exactly.
And you have no bosses. I like the reframe of clients. Like you have a lot of clients to serve, which I think is a better frame, but I get how it can feel like I have all these bosses.
Yeah, I mean, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Like it's true. Like it is fucking stressful. Like you are dealing with everybody's problems. Anytime someone gets in a disagreement with another person, someone cheats on someone, I worked in a kitchen, remember? So these things actually happen. Like someone commits sexual harassment, you know, someone gets hurt. Literally, like we had someone who was had permanent life, injuries. Someone commits suicide. Like all of these things, they all come back. Like you are obviously not solely responsible for any of these things at all, but like people lean their stress on you in those moments and you have to take it, and of course like the ideal world is not to take it, let it flow past you, using your tai chi sort of system, but like the reality is like people do it to you, and you will eventually have some absorption of it, and so it's a lot of stress, and so when I was finally free of that, and by the way, the outside pressure of the company succeeding or failing, and you knowing it was failing, but everyone else think it's succeeding, so
Mm. Mm.
hero and you feel like a fraud, and all of that. So you then go and you spend, I spent 3 years, I was just completely free, and it was
Mm.
insane, like the most blissful time of my entire life. Like
Mm.
I mean, being married is close, like I would say like I'm actually really, really free being like in a happy marriage. But I will say that even still you cannot compare the two. Like they just have different values. Um, Completely free in the world, financially secure, um, and going out there and just like doing whatever I want for many years. And I realized I was so happy
Mm.
doing nothing, like
Mm.
nothing basically, that I could not possibly be solely defined by but the burden of proof could no longer be. Like it just didn't make sense. Like how could it
Mm.
possibly be like becoming a billionaire? Because I'm like, I had this meeting with Brian Chesky. I'm sure he won't care that I say this because he probably doesn't even remember. But like I had this meeting with Brian Chesky in person at his office in Airbnb. It was the only meeting I took and the only visit I made to the States in roughly like 9 months after I left, for travels. I flew back to meet with Brian Chesky only to recruit me for a role at Airbnb. And um, and I met him and I told him what I was doing, like that I was traveling the world and I was staying in places for a month and blah, blah. And he was like, and I think this was genuine. He was like, if it weren't for Airbnb, I'd be doing exactly that. And I was like, wow. I mean, that is a guy I was comparing myself to. That is a guy who I thought for a long time, I thought I'm as good as him. I've met people who work for him. I've seen what he does on the field. I know I've seen him throw the ball. Like I've seen what he's doing. I still to this day would tell you that there's very little difference, not just between me and Brian, but between lots of entrepreneurs. Like like 100,000 entrepreneurs in Brian. Like I think he's amazing. I think who he's become is probably different than what I am today because his
Mm.
experiences are different. And so that's hard to compete with. But at that time, like I think there was a lot of similarities between him and all the other people who were starting marketplaces. He happened to pick travel. Anyways, so even if you compare, Brian to like 100,000 other people who tried to start, or maybe it's 10,000, I don't know the number, but like, you know, he ended up starting Airbnb. He has now learned things that no one else has, and that's just reality. And who he
Mm.
is today is like, in a certain way, not in every way, actually, is the lesson here, but in a certain way, he has learned things that like, I can never do at my company. Like, I don't have that instinct and lessons, etc.
Mm.
But I got something different, and the thing I got that I have met very few people. I've met a few people in the world who've had the joy of the experience that I've had, where I've been able to prove myself for myself in a career way, and then also gone and had like years of just like play and joy and exploration, like a true sabbatical in sort of the ancient sense of that word. Um, and I got to really enjoy myself and find who I was and found, my now wife while traveling. And so my burden of proof changed. And my
Mm.
burden of proof, I did not lose the desire to keep building. I did not lose the desire to prove myself. You can hear it in the way that I'm comparing even to this
Mhm.
day. But I started to have a perspective shift that there are many versions of comparison. And, a Naval quote really reminds me of this that I love. It's like, he's like, and I think he's re-quoting someone else, but it's like, if you're envious of someone, think of it like you have to trade their entire life for your life. Like in this case, it's like, would I give up my wife to be CEO of Airbnb? Like, absolutely not. Like
Mhm.
there's not a question in my life.
Mm.
Now, if I could
Mm.
bring my wife with me, like, yes, I would be RP. But like,
Well,
would
yeah,
I
you
give
can't just
up
take the
that?
one slice of their life that you're,
Yeah,
envious
'cause-
of and leave all the rest, and all the rest is great.
exactly.
Yeah, that's a
So I
great.
think that is something that I really have taken with me. So the burden of proof changed,
Yeah.
and the chip on my shoulder really, really subsided. And
What's the
I
burden of proof now?
I don't know. Is there a burden of proof? I mean, honestly, like I don't know. Like
Yeah.
maybe it's there is still things like that I desire and want, but I don't think they come from proving myself. I don't feel I don't
Yeah, I
know.
think it's an illusion. It was a leading question. I was hoping you'd say that. Yeah, I don't think there is any burden of proof. And what proving what to whom? Like, what do we even mean
Exactly.
by that, right? I
Yeah.
think that we're inherently and born worthy, and the rest is just what we choose to do. And I think you made this point several times in several different ways around authenticity. That is really important because I've said to a bunch of founders, okay, you're trying to figure out like what did Sam Altman do, what did Brian Chesky do, or what would Larry and Sergey do? It's like, well, what if what they did was be unapologetically themselves, right? And so I see this pattern a lot of trying to emulate these other people who have the results that you want. And I think we get overly attached to your point of the results because we make them mean something about who we are and trying to prove something versus really just following your authentic truth, your authentic desires and wants. And I believe, and you kind of said this earlier, that leads you to whatever you're here to learn and experience rather than some idea you have of what you're supposed to be learning and experience, which probably came from someone else or some need to prove something by some external standard. So I love that. It seems like that's part of what's been your own insight is, oh, I have these desires and you don't need to feel a sense of lack or need to prove something to follow your desire. Like I love to ski, so I ski. You love to start companies, so you start companies. Like, and that's we talk about the heart of entrepreneurship, right? That's like coming from love. Like, what if you could just do it because you love to do it? And I hear, and we have a few more minutes at least. I hear that there's still some way that you're motivating yourself from pain. So tell me a little bit more about that and what you'd like to experience instead.
Um, Honestly, I don't totally know. I just know it's there. Like
Mm.
it's sort of like this thing where it still feels like I'm still like it's almost like it's like a have you ever done you've done EMR, right? Electro, what is it? The what's that called?
EMDR, the thing with the
EMDR.
I have
The
not. I don't think I've actually done it, but I know what it
so
is.
EMDR is really interesting. It's like you bring up memories in a coaching session or a therapy session, and you use this bilateral stimulation is the way that I did it. Basically like you can do any sort of version of it, but for me it was buzzers in my hands, and you essentially try to process and relegate the memories that are really driving you, the negative ones especially, into sort of a more foggy, distant past. Kind of like the way when you wake up from a dream, you have very few bits and pieces of a dream that you remember, and then days later it's like, oh yeah, I had that dream and it has a thing and blah blah blah. Like, but you don't really know anything about it. You can't describe it at all. It's a feeling, but you can't
Mm,
describe it. I would say that's where I'm at with the burden of
yeah.
proof thing. Like, there's
It's
a
not
feeling
conscious. It's not even a thought.
still there, of
Yeah.
course, but I also feel like I definitely feel like I'm mostly acting without it. So I am at the
Mhm.
point where like most of my macro decisions, like if I look at my macro decision to start Maven, if I look at my macro decision to, get involved in Oakland politics, which I'm
Yeah.
very involved in, if I look at my macro decision to not be an investor, where I was an investor for a little while, um, I look at even my decision to become an investor for a little while, where I was investing in startups. I think those were not really defined by a feeling of pain.
Mm.
They were defined mostly by a feeling of play, curiosity, maybe confusion, but not pain.
Hmm.
Uh, and like, what else do I do? A little bit of boredom, probably. Like maybe that's some of the pain is boredom now. Some of the pain is like, oh, I don't want to be bored, so I got to do
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking earlier, you took 3 years off. There's this quote, most of man's struggles comes from his inability to sit quietly alone in a room. And you were traveling the world, you weren't sitting quietly alone. But I know a lot of founders have tried to take time off, thought, that'd be such a relief, but they really struggle. How did you, I don't know, do you have a sense of like how did that work for you that you were able to be without the identity of, entrepreneur and,
Well, I did throw myself into my own personal mission during that time period, right? So I think it's worth noting that I had training wheels. I wasn't literally like, I am going to try and sit alone in a room tomorrow after having spent, 10 years throwing myself against a wall every day trying to build a company. Like, I think that's not the story. The story was I, you know, I made it easier on myself by giving myself a sort of micro personal mission, which was to really become to build a broad-based understanding of modern human society is what I would call it. I know it sounds really stupid, but like what I mean by that is like I literally took like a map of the world and I said there's all these different people all over the world, like groups of people, Africans as a category or Indians
Mhm.
as a category or East Asians as a category. And I was like, I just kind of want to get to know all these people. Like as societies, not as individuals, because there's 9 billion people. It's impossible.
Yeah.
But as societies, I wanted to get to know them. And so I like took a map literally and like pointed out areas I thought would be good hotspots. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go explore all these areas. And so over the time, this happened, and so there was a personal mission,
Got it.
and some people might have a personal mission to like sail around the world and learn sailing, or they might have a
Mhm.
personal mission to go and like, you know, climb the top 10 peaks, right?
Yeah.
Like
Okay, so
personally,
you didn't sit quietly and alone in a room. You had a mission. It was another pursuit,
it was another
which is
pursuit, but it
great.
did
And
force me to sit quietly alone in a room.
say
You
again.
know, I would not say so. So as an example, I know Andrew Warner's going to eventually listen to this, and like I will just give my 2 cents on what I think, on what I feel. It's me reflecting back. Andrew once was like, "Yeah, I did something similar. I went and ran a marathon on all 7 continents." Like I will just say that I think that there is a like relative difference between the amount of quiet you can find doing one or the other. And the path that I chose allowed me to find quiet. And
Mhm.
not, and by the way, if he had done that over the course of a year, doing a marathon on every continent, he would absolutely find quiet,
And what did
right?
you discover in the quiet?
I just discovered myself, like my own unique expression of myself, and like discovered that I was really happy with it. I was really proud of where I'd gotten to in my life, like as a human. Like it just like, one of the things I did is like I wouldn't tell people what my career was. I kept my career private and really did not answer questions about it. So people would ask me, "What did you do?" Whatever. Luckily, in foreign countries, it's less common to ask that when traveling. But people would ask me, I just wouldn't answer the question. I'd say, "Oh, I did marketing in tech." That's basically what I did. And like, um, I would never tell them that I was a founder. I would not tell them the name of the company, etc. And so I forced myself to show up however I was at that moment, that day. Like if I show up and meet someone, like they're experiencing who I am at that moment, they have no baggage whatsoever. And I realized I really liked that. I like that
Mm.
for myself. I
You
wasn't
learn to
saying it
love
like you all.
yourself without the identity of success or money or you know
Yeah. And honestly,
or
without any real identity.
yeah, without any
People
identity.
barely, yeah,
Beautiful.
people barely knew my name, right? They barely knew where I was from, like what
Mhm.
ethnicity. They didn't know anything.
Just right now, this human being right here.
Yeah, we're
That's
like,
beautiful.
sitting and talking about like the play where the sort of people on the street, and we're just talking about
Mm.
nonsense basically.
Mm.
Like, do I like myself in that moment?
I
I
love
found that
that.
I did.
I'm so glad that you had that experience. Um, so the thing I want to say to you about this like echo of pain, which is kind of what I'm hearing. Um, there's this, I'll paraphrase a little bit the expression I heard recently, which is your unfelt feelings are keeping your unwanted patterns in place. And I did hear you say, maybe I'm running away from boredom. And that's partly why I asked about like, were you sitting quietly, alone in a room? Boredom is actually a form of anger. A lot of people don't connect that.
Oh, I can.
Regardless, my sense is if you go toward the boredom and welcome and feel the boredom, um, you might gain some freedom in that. And more generally, I would really look like to me where true freedom lies is in welcoming all feelings: guilt, shame, embarrassment, dread, anger, sadness. So I'd get, I don't know if you have a sense, I'd get curious, which are the feelings you tend to, because most of us have like, oh, these are the good ones, these are the bad ones, these are positive, these are negative. We learned, do you have a sense of, are there any particular feelings that you tend to judge or avoid or suppress?
Probably still more gratitude and sort of like warm feelings, I would say, is part of it. Like, I still stay in my head when things are great. Like,
Yeah. By the way, that's eerily common that people think that we mostly resist the quote unquote negative feelings and important quote unquote the ones we perceive as negative, anger, sadness, fear. Most people actually resist joy, aliveness, gratitude even more. It's like this upper limit we have, and so that might be as powerful a journey for you as anything. It's just like okay, you might default to what feels more like a reminiscent of painful feelings, um, in in just resisting the joy. And really, I think what causes pain is resistance. So any feeling resisted feels painful. That same feeling not resisted doesn't. So I wonder how much of the pain is just resisted joy. And what would happen if you really practiced celebrating, in those moments where you notice going into your mind to distract yourself, go back into your body and see how much you'd be willing to feel the effervescence, the joy, do you have a sense of what you're scared of? Like, what if you just fully welcomed all the joy and gratitude and excitement?
Um, I have a sense. We have gotten to the point of the conversation that is for a private coaching session and not a public one. I hope that the public session was sufficiently enlightening for anyone listening.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I think that's a good, let's have that conversation if you're open to it.
Sure.
And I think it's a good leave for a lot of, folks listening. You may actually be resisting joy and aliveness, and then um, the symptoms of that feel like common symptoms, being in your head, blah blah blah, and most people don't realize that's actually what's occurring. So that's a good reflection. If I might be very self-indulgent, you attended this 4-day retreat that we did in January. You were really generous and gracious and sort of providing some glowing commentary. I guess what I want to ask, just to as we close here, is like there's a lot of founders, especially ones who've been really successful or identify as like super smart, think they don't need these kind of things, don't need to do the inner work. Like, if you could share, if you'd be willing to share, what was it for you that was so powerful that had you choose to come and be glad that you did to this 4-day retreat?
Well, on the inner work part first, I'd just say like, I heard this the other day. I was like, four of the top 10 tech founders of all time, like by like net worth, like attend Burning Man regularly, like hadn't have for like 20, 30 years.
Hmm.
Like personally think uh, can have my own opinions about Burning Man today, but if you've been going for 20 to 30 years, you've done a lot of self-reflection and a lot of personal growth. It's impossible not to in that environment. And so I'd say like it's actually like I don't know many. There are some. There is a set of investors and founders who do not ascribe to the personal growth mantra, but the vast majority do. So I would just say like it's pretty universal, and the reason in my mind is that like uh, eventually you realize that everything you're dealing with, whether it's a strategic challenge of where to take the company, or it's a personnel challenge of having like consistently bad like COOs that you hire, or whether it's like dealing with a partner who doesn't want to partner with you, but you're frustrated and you're dealing with it. Like all of these challenges can be improved through inner game work. So it's like the more you understand yourself, the more you can regulate your emotions, the more you can make decisions from a, without lack, as you say, and sort of some of the language that you use, like the more you can do that, the better you're going to perform and the happier you'll be. And so in my mind, the reason I went from, whatever 20% retention, 5-year retention of my team at Udemy or at Sprig, to like 50 plus percent at Maven, the reason why I'd say like Maven is probably, I think it has a chance to be the most stable and successful company of the three. It's still too early to say for sure, but it has the chance. Um, and the reason why I'm enjoying myself so much more this time than I did in previous times, um, I think all of those are because I have invested in personal growth. And it's not a direct thing. You do the personal growth, you're not going to feel better the next week. You just sort of invest in it loosely over a very long period of time. It's like practicing a sport. Like I play soccer, and I practice, and very often the week I have a great practice, I don't have a great game, or the week I have a great game, I come back to practice and I screw it up. But now I've been doing this like practice game rotation for 3 years now, and like if you compare myself 3 years later to where I was when I started, it is unrecognizable growth. And I no longer, my dips today in my game don't come anywhere close to where my game was when I started. And I think that same thing is true for entrepreneurship. And the way you practice is you go and you spend, I don't know, ten to $20,000 a year, roughly, and obviously it scales up as you get more successful, 10 to 20 grand a year, and like 4 to 10 days worth of accumulated effort per year, every year into just bettering yourself. And if you do that, like over the course of a long period of time, like you will see a night and day difference between how you show up and what your outcomes are across the board. It doesn't give you that much of a better chance at product market fit, but it does give you a much better chance at execution and strategy success.
I wholeheartedly agree, but I'm obviously quite biased. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective on that. Your outer results are a reflection of your inner world. Well, Gagan, I want to be mindful of time. I know we've run over a little what we said, so thank you for being so generous with your time and being vulnerable. And is there anything else you want to leave the audience with that you'd feel remiss if you didn't say? Okay. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.